welcome to our 2024 broadcast. Happy New Year. The U.S. Senate Republicans in early December of 2023 blocked a ban on assault-style weapons, but put forward by Democrats as the United States recorded the highest number of mass shootings for the second year in a row in 2023. Will 2024 be any different? The notion was put forward by Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, which would have reauthorized the assault weapons ban, which first passed in 1994 and expired 10 years later. The ban covers certain semi-automatic firearms and large-capacity ammunition magazines. But I know the argument is that this did usher in a decrease of deaths from gun violence while it was in place. But is that really true? Kris Brown is president of Brady United Against Gun Violence. We all know about Sarah and Mr. Brady, her husband, who was Ronald Reagan's former press secretary, who was shot. But no, even after his shooting and his advocacy, they continued to store firearms in their homes. And I know you all, as Kris, as president of the Brady United, advocates for safe storage.
Yes.
You don't want to ban weapons. You want to make sure they're stored safely in the homes, because I don't think many people realize the statistic that 8 to 10 children die a day because of gun violence. You know, I'm interested in your take on this assault weapons ban. We have experts here, Leon Spears, who's president and the owner of DC Concealed Carry, and Sal Greco, who's a 14-year New York Police Department veteran, to talk about it, because I do think as we start out the new year, we need to have a conversation about these assault weapons and also about how we protect these children.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% agree.
So what is it, do you want the ban of assault weapons, or what is a compromise your organization would support?
Well, first of all, Brady, obviously, as you noted, Armstrong was founded by Jim and Sarah. They were gun owners their whole lives, including after Jim was shot. What we want to do is recognize that we have a public health epidemic in our country, and it is of gun violence. Guns are now the #1 killer of our kids in this country. That's a uniquely American problem. There is no one solution that is necessary to solve it. We have to treat it like the public health epidemic that it is. There are policy solutions. There's certainly a huge and important role for better enforcement, 100%. And we also have to really lift up responsible gun ownership, safe storage, Armstrong, which if everyone who had a gun in the home undertook safe storage today, it would save more lives than any policy or any enforcement action we can take.
Describe safe storage in a home.
Safe
Because
storage.
I know many gun owners have bought into this program.
Yes, absolutely. So we have a campaign called End Family Fire. Family fire is the unintentional injury or death of a loved one with a gun in the home that is not safely stored. So what is safe storage? Safe storage is putting your gun in some kind of safe, right? Unloaded, ammo separate. Why is that so important, Armstrong? Number one, 8 kids a day are killed or injured with guns in their own home. 75% of school shooters get their guns from a home where those guns are not safely stored. And 65% of all gun deaths, more than 40,000 a year, are suicide. What's the #1 risk factor for a suicide in the home? Presence of a loaded and unsecured firearm. Any barrier that you can put in front of someone who may be having a really bad day, right? And they get home and they see a loaded and unsecured weapon. The one way to prevent a suicide, if you have a firearm in the home, is to safely store that firearm. So that's why that's so critically important, and we can save so many lives just through the simple mechanism of safe storage. And responsible gun owners across this country understand this. But we have a huge number, 64% increase in gun sales during COVID, of folks who are new gun owners who don't understand perhaps the critical importance of safe storage in their homes.
So, Sal, as a former member of the New York Police Department, how do you challenge or even embrace some of what Kris is saying?
I understand what she's saying. I feel what she's saying. Some of it, I can understand. But as far as they were buying guns, I guess during the COVID lockdowns. Did anyone remember that out in the street, especially in New York City? Did you see the anarchy that was going on in the street? That's why people wanted to become gun owners, and it's their right. I mean, it's in the Constitution. And I understand that there's gun violence. I hate to bring this up, but I was a guy that enforced DWIs. I mean, I think a lot more people die under the hands of a drunk driver than they do with somebody with a gun in their hands. I mean, I understand there's mass shootings, but there's also a lot of victims of drunk drivers. So would we ban cars? It's the same concept. I mean, you can't just put a blanket charge over something and say, well, we want to take all the assault weapons. It's people's right. It's not the gun that kills people, Armstrong. It's the people that have it. So then it would go to maybe there's a mental health crisis in this country because maybe there are some people that had problems in their past. They decide to go buy a gun in whatever state it is because, again, each state has their own rules. And then they go and do something crazy. And, I mean, you can't prevent someone if they're going to do something crazy with a knife. I mean, there's knives in a home. I'm sure that children play with knives. Use a knife to cut vegetables, don't you? So it's the same concept. We can't just put a blanket over guns and say, all right, well, all assault weapons, they should be banned and we should take everything out. Everything's usually done at a case-by-case, case-by-case situation. That's how I would view it. And, again, I think it's a mental health problem and not a gun problem.
So when we come back, we're going to have your rebuttal. We're going to get Leon Spears involved in the conversation, and we'll be back.
Thank you.
Your response?
Well, I didn't hear anything objecting, actually, to the idea of safe storage
but
of firearms.
But the point he made is with a knife, with a vehicle.
Yeah, and he made a point about mental health, but Armstrong, the United States doesn't have any more mental health disorders that are diagnosed than any other country. We have a lot more gun violence. So the idea that we would allow the continuation of firearms to be the #1 killer of our kids. Knives aren't, firearms are. And the way that we should approach it is like we do all other public health issues. When we had huge numbers of people dying in automobile accidents in the 1950s, we didn't say, what's the one thing that we can do to save lives? We said, what are all of the things that we can do to save lives? That's how we got the national speed limit, seat belts, airbags, bumper rails on the highways. We can take sensible steps that don't in any way. Yes, a process.
So where are you on the assault weapons ban?
We support an assault weapons ban, absolutely.
Why?
Because it worked. When it was passed in 1994, we did
give us
see
the numbers
a decrease.
to show that it worked.
We saw about a 50% decrease in the use of assault-style weapons in mass shootings for the decade that assault weapons ban was put in place. And I will say, Armstrong, we've seen a huge number of assault-style weapons used in very notable mass shootings across this country. And why is that? They are highly lethal. They can spray bullets faster than you can with a handgun.
Even though the majority of people die from handguns and not assault weapons.
That's correct. But if you do polls across the country, right, and if you look at the polls and the support nationally for an assault weapons ban, it has grown year after year after year because people are afraid across this country to be in public spaces and go about their business because they're afraid that someone can come in and spray bullets randomly and that they'll be hit. So while we certainly support the idea that folks should be able to go out and buy firearms, these are particularly lethal firearms designed for combat. And by the way, in terms of hunting, you can't carry an assault-style weapon on any federal or state hunting land across this country. Most of those properties require that you limit the bullets, often to less than 5. So in terms of sport and these kinds of activities for hunting, they're inapposite, but they are highly lethal for hunting of human beings. And we think there should be limits.
Leon, your response?
I just disagree 100%. The issue is that, number one, you can hunt with 308s. The assault, quote unquote, the assault weapon platform is just, quote unquote, scary looking to all these left advocates regarding an assault weapon ban. What's an assault weapon? By what definition is an assault weapon? ATF doesn't have a definition of what, quote unquote, an assault weapon is. That's a misnomer. People, just like the other guest, people kill people. They use the firearm as a tool. I do agree that access to firearms is critical in terms of you should not have unauthorized persons gaining access to firearms. But when you just start with, quote unquote, rifles, or in this young lady's vocabulary, assault weapons, where does it stop? Do you go with semi-automatic handguns? Do you go with shotguns? Then do you go with revolvers? Where does it stop? Do you only want to limit 10-round magazines arbitrarily? So again, just like your other phenomenal guest, it just happens to be a blanket, and it looks scary. It looks like, quote unquote, a weapon of war. Those are all misnomers. People need to be responsible for handling of firearms. If they're not, then again, law enforcement needs to take appropriate steps, and that's just that. I mean, we have our Second Amendment.
Let me say this.
So
First of all,
it's very clear.
I know you're not to the left, and you agree with us more than we disagree.
Yes.
And you know, I saw this story in December about the twins, young kids. One became upset with the other and shot with a firearm.
Yeah.
And I hear these sad stories. So I think, Sal, what is it that we need to do with assault weapons that we're unwilling to do to make it not only safe, but to reduce the fear that people have surrounding assault weapons?
I think people are just in fear of anything in general. I mean, if you read into what you see in the news every day, it's doom and gloom, especially if, you have these mass shootings that happen. But again, Armstrong, I understand the children, they grabbed the firearm. That means whoever owned the firearm didn't put it in a safe place. They didn't have it in a lockbox. And these are things that maybe possibly could be criminal as far as individuals. Because yet again, it goes into an individual basis, not a blanket basis. And I feel sorry for even hearing stories like that. But again, it's the human behind the gun, not the gun. If we're going to say take all the guns, we're going to have a problem, because Armstrong, if let's say we were to ban all assault weapons, there's still assault weapons out there. And as you notice, other countries, whether it be in the Middle East, go to any country where they ban these weapons, or they still have these weapons, they're still out there, and it will be used by, quote unquote, a bad guy or someone with a mental health crisis. So again, those guns are designed to protect you, not to be offensive.
We're going to take a break, and no matter what argument we have, the criminals are not giving up their firearms, and they don't even care about the legality of the argument. And it's a dilemma. It's no cut and dry solutions to this crisis that we face. We'll be back. So, if we've heard this discussion about the different perspectives on the assault weapons, and are you saying just ban them all outright?
We do need a ban. That's the same kind of ban.
So they should not even be manufactured anymore?
I don't think that they should be available for sale or purchase in the United States. Yes. However, I want to make something clear in response to some of the prior commentary, which is in the United States today, 1 in 5 Americans either has been shot, has a family member who was shot, or has a close personal friend who was shot as a result of gun violence here in the United States. If we don't do something more, the statistics show that a decade from now, that'll be 1 in 3. I go all over the country and talk to folks, Armstrong, red states, blue states, men, women, people of all demographics. I've never seen the number of people more fearful about gun violence. And I talk to a lot of survivors. So I want to make one point about assault-style weapons to react to what was said by our friends here. I was at Vegas the day after that shooting. It's one of the largest mass shootings that has ever happened in U.S. history. The individual who undertook that shooting did it from a hotel that was several football fields away from the Harvest Festival going on. Hundreds of people were shot in that horrific massacre in less than 2 minutes, Armstrong. And the reason why is an assault-style weapon was used with a high-capacity magazine, several that he had, hundreds of rounds of ammunition, and that high-capacity magazine was capable of having 100 bullets affixed to it. That no one can reasonably argue that that firearm and its lethality is just like a handgun. It's not that people like me are reacting to the scariness of how an assault weapon looks. We're reacting to the carnage. And go talk to anyone who survives that kind of event and understand what it is like to be in combat. Our soldiers in combat experience the exact same thing, and that's what those weapons were designed to do. So I do think we have to have a serious debate about this, but I also know that those countries, Australia and New Zealand, for example, that have banned assault-style weapons, you know what? Mass shootings with those weapons have virtually been eliminated. People are alive today in those countries because of those choices.
You know, Leon, it's a compelling argument.
I just think it's buffoonery.
Leon, it's not buffoonery. Come on now.
I literally believe...
But buffoonery may not be the right word. You may disagree, but it's not buffoonery.
No, I mean, your guess is a wonderful
listen. We went to Vegas to cover...
Say,
Wait. We went to Vegas and we covered this story, and she's correct in her descriptions. You can't argue with it. It's just a fact. He shot them like they were animals.
Armstrong, there are 2 main points that... the lovely Kris has made sure
no pistol can shoot human beings from that distance, several football fields. Leon, they can't.
It's very, very clear. Number one, the statement was originally ban all assault weapons.
But we're only talking about what she just addressed in her compelling argument about what happened in Las Vegas.
I understand that, Armstrong. I understand that. So my thing is that where does it stop? She doesn't want any assault weapon firearm sold in this nation. Does that mean civilians? That
Armstrong.
Means law enforcement? That means specifically any sport? Period.
Go ahead, answer quickly before I go to break.
If that's going to be the focus, let me just say what I personally and Brady would be willing to say is let's ban high-capacity magazines with more than 10 rounds. You can't use them on any hunting property. And let's make the sale of assault-style weapons regulated under the National Firearms Act the same way that we did machine guns. What would these folks react to?
I'm going to break. Sal, what would you say to that quickly in 5 seconds?
I don't mind background checks. I think that the checks they have now, state to state, is good. I mean, it's a state's decision. It's a legislative decision. And
so
remember,
progress. Let me take a break and come back with some final thoughts. So progress here. We'll be back. If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com. You know, I recently saw on network television physicians and psychiatrists arguing that blaming this violence on depression and mental illness is just overrated.
Yeah. Well, the statistics bear that out, Armstrong. If you are someone who has a diagnosed mental illness, you're much more likely to be the victim of gun violence, not the perpetrator. And
which means that these natural-born killers know exactly what they're doing. And it's intentional and planned and organized.
Normally it is, right? We see from Columbine forward, let's just focus on the school shootings, huge amounts of planning, huge amounts of preparation, often manifestos. I'm thinking about the Tops shooting, which is clearly targeted based on race, and a huge manifesto of planning associated with that. That is absolutely correct.
Sal, do you think there will be any movement on this issue with assault weapons?
Well, it's funny that she mentioned it. I was just trying to go back to what she said a couple of minutes ago with the 1 in 5 and 1 in 3, and that's in the studies. Actually, if you go back to Las Vegas, when that gentleman had all those assault weapons, he was carrying these boxes into the casino. And the one problem we have here is, A, security. There's a lapse in security. No one's asking questions. I mean, they were very large boxes. 2, we go back to what we were talking about recently about policing, proactive policing. See, these guns are also falling into the hands of what? Gang members. Chicago, New York, LA. All these different areas, all these like high, the high suburb, a high city, a big city area. They have these guns.
They have 20 seconds.
Armstrong, I just want to focus on one thing. We have more gun dealers in this country than McDonald's and Starbucks combined. 5% of them are responsible for 90% of the crime guns. We need to focus as much on those dealers who are selling to traffickers knowingly and shut them down. That's the enforcement piece. ATF and the role of police here is so critically important to that. So I just want to make that point.
And I thank all of you for starting and kicking off the new year on this very important topic. I'm Armstrong Williams. Happy 2024. It is 2024, and welcome to the brand new Armstrong Williams show. Joel and Bruce are back with us, two of my favorite guests, and I welcome you in 2024. I'm glad to see that you both make it. Joel, let me start with you. What is the future of cryptocurrency this year?
You know, the cryptocurrency markets are some of the most volatile in the world. We see intraday price swings of 5 to 10% quite often. So making a prediction about where exactly the price level might end up next year is not something I'm going to engage in. But I will tell you this, there's many people that have flocked to cryptocurrency because they have lost faith in the fiat money system. Nearly each and every year, our dollar, no matter what the fiat system you're using, that loses money almost each and every year. We've seen that accelerate over the past few years with inflation. And for that reason, a lot of individual investors are going to continue to explore the possibility of putting at least part of their savings in something like cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, for instance. Whether or not that will indeed hold its value any better than fiat currency, the future will have to tell us that. Just one side note on that, we see a lot of governments that are restricting the use of crypto, including on the exchange platforms. We saw Jamie Dimon, the CEO of one of the world's largest banks, the other day. He actually said if it were up to him, he would outlaw cryptocurrency. And what that suggests is that there is a danger for those that are holding on to Bitcoin, that there will be more government regulation of possessing it and trading. If that happens, that could negatively impact the price.
What do you think is the outlook after coming now into 2024? Because 2023 was just a volatile stock market. I mean, what a roller coaster. What can we expect of the stock market this year?
Well, what we do know is that the economy seems to be slowing. We have seen jobs growth stall out. Even though the top line numbers are great, the number of full-time jobs since June has actually declined by around 10,000 nationwide. And if the economy does indeed slow down in 2024, that could really put the clamp on corporate earnings. And that's what really drives the stock market acceleration. Right now, we've got the market near the year highs. But what's really interesting is that if you look at the past 2 years, the market is basically flat, but adjusted for inflation, that means that if you're invested in overall index funds, you've actually lost about 25% of your overall value. So if we do indeed see the market slow in 2024, that would not bode well for market results.
You know, let me stay with you some more. I want you to put the almighty dollar in perspective. We've seen all kinds of different entities from Iran, Russia, and China trying to create their own fiat currency. Is the dollar weak? And it seems as though no matter what happened in 2023 with the economy, because other markets and other economies are so much in the toilet, the dollar still remains strong. What is the future of the dollar being the global currency, and how long can that last, and what threatens it, and what also strengthens its viability?
Yeah, so since World War II, the U.S. dollar has been the primary currency of choice for international trade and for foreign governments who hold money in reserves. And that's because our economy has been second to none. We have seen the demand for a dollar decline over the past several years. First, decline because we've been using our dollar as a tool to push forward our foreign policy objectives, whether it's sanctions on Russia or sanctions on Iran. And I actually think that's a positive that we are able to use our financial system rather than our actual military, because that means fewer loss of lives. But that has also caused regimes worldwide, including China, to seek alternatives to using the dollar for trade and for holding on to reserves. So that has resulted in the dollar as a share of all global reserve currencies to plunge to multi-decade lows. But second of all, the fact that we have used our Federal Reserve to print trillions of dollars to fund government spending and to buy government debt, that also has weakened our dollar. It's a big part of the reason why we saw the highest inflation in 40 years. Now, as you referenced, it hasn't been as bad in this country as other countries. That's because governments across the world have acted rashly and irresponsibly. But because we have long-term entitlement programs that have not been addressed, the long-term prospects are for a continued weakening dollar because politicians have done nothing to remedy those ills. And that suggests that we're going to once again resort to our printing presses of the Fed in the years going forward. That's going to weaken the value of each and every dollar that we hold.
Give us a brief lesson in 2024 where you see inflation, hyperinflation, and deflation.
Well, we have seen the inflation rate level off, but of course it's still at much higher levels than where it was just a few years ago. And I think regardless of where that inflation rate goes next year, it's not going to do anything to actually eliminate the real pay cut that families have experienced because of the sky-high inflation. That's about $5,000 per family of four that we've seen in reduced real income. And I'm not confident that the Federal Reserve has this under control. There's already whisperings that the Fed will abandon its goal to get us back to 2% inflation, and that would keep us at closer to 3 or even 4% inflation. We have to remember, the way that we can actually increase middle-class incomes is for our productivity rate to actually increase, and to increase at a greater rate than that inflation rate. When you have all these government regulations that Biden has been piling on, in addition to this enormous government that just blossomed under President Trump, and of course President Biden expanded, that does not bode well for the families. And so while I don't expect a return to the 8 and 9% inflation rates in 2024, I don't anticipate us going back to the 2% that we were used to, and I don't anticipate us being able to close that big loss in income that we've seen over the past 2 years.
When we come back, we will get Bruce Fein's perspective. It is a presidential election year. It's 2024. We'll talk about the political class, and we'll also talk about the courts up next on this edition of the Armstrong Williams Show. Will Hunter Biden be indicted this year? We saw the charges of him in December. Will it impact his father's run for the president? Will Donald Trump face the music this year in terms of all Georgia, Mar-a-Lago? There's a lot pending. And will the Supreme Court save him?
Well, let's try to unpack those seriatim. One, Hunter Biden. Yes, they've come back now with a second indictment the U.S. Attorney has from Delaware, charging him with several felony counts, 6 misdemeanor counts for evading income taxes, filing false returns, claiming, among other things, $200,000 as a business expense for
sexual favors.
For sexual favors, yeah.
Unbelievable.
Utterly preposterous.
Yes.
I mean, there's not any possible good faith defense.
Right.
And we know that basically he was a derelict. You know, he's been a derelict for decades, living like a child, drug addict, lying on his forms to get a gun, denying that he was in drug treatment program, which would have prohibited from buying a firearm. So his trial is going to go forward, and the likelihood of a conviction, I believe, is overwhelming. Now, is that going to handicap Joe Biden? I think it will. I don't want to overstate that. You know, we've had presidents before who had brothers in problems, Billy Carter with Jimmy Carter, and Libya and Colonel Gaddafi. Richard Nixon had some brothers who had some problems with Howard Hughes. But it's certainly not going to be a benefit. It really underscores, I think, the disappointment of the general public in seeing that you have an elite political class in Washington that plays off of their power, association with power. So it's influence peddling is what's going on here, which caused great dissatisfaction and feel we have a two-tiered system of economy and justice. With regard to Mr. Trump, it's very complex. I believe that there definitely will be decisions in Washington, D.C., where they've got the January 6th prosecution before the 2024 election ends. The judge currently has a trial date of March 4th. And I view the most difficult smoking gun for Trump to refute is the vice president's testimony, which has been unrefuted, that on the morning of January 6th, Mr. Trump told him, you choose between me and the Constitution, showing Mr. Trump knew the difference between the Constitution and what he was asking the vice president to do, which was not count the electoral votes that had been certified by the states. And a corrupt intent is what's critical to proving the alleged violations of law. Now, you never know. They have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. A jury really, they call it jury nullification, come acquit anybody they want to. The jury deliberations are secret. But I think that's very likely to happen. It's the case that I think will reach a verdict first. The other cases are further down the road. The one, for example, in Georgia that you mentioned, the racketeering case, fraudulent electors, that's not even scheduled for trial now till August of 2024, just a few months before the ballot. I don't think that verdict is going to come to a close. With regard to the Mar-a-Lago case, this is the Espionage Act, the misuse of presidential records or destruction of records, obstruction of justice. That's still not scheduled until sometime in May, and the judge there has indicated because it involves classified information that it could be postponed further. The one up in New York, this is the Stormy Daniels, paying for silence over his affair. I don't think that's going to be a substantial burden on a campaign. It's just, listen, everybody. It's like Clinton, It didn't matter whether he lied under oath. Everybody has sex with their underlings or whatever. I don't think it's true, but that was the kind of thing. No, I hope I don't, Jonathan. I'm not accusing you. Okay. But I mean, that was the kind of the defense that was have. Well, it was just locker room talk, and who cares? So that is likely also to be the kind of way the American people would receive that verdict, and that's not scheduled until late in 2024 either. So overall, I do think it looks grim in my judgment for Mr. Trump. He's trying to delay the trials by filing appeals. The gist of the appeal is what he said on July 23rd, 2019, and this is an exact quote, Armstrong. Then I have Article 2, where I have the right to do anything I want as president. Similar to what he said the other day, on day one, I'm a dictator. I mean, how much clearer can you get as to his contempt for the Constitution and the rule of law? So that's where we are.
The Supreme Court?
Now, the Supreme Court, they have, let me talk about two cases first that I think are important, then the possibility that they might intervene in some of the Trump cases that are not that level yet. One, we do have the court taking on the efforts of state governments, both Florida and Texas, trying to control the ability of social media to censor viewpoints they don't like. Okay? And in both states, they enacted laws that said no, that there's certain viewpoints you can't censor based upon what the government thought should be given free speech protection. In one case, a court of appeals said that's unconstitutional, invades the free speech rights of somebody to decide what they want to promote and not. In the other case, the court of appeals said no, it was constitutional. And the U.S. Supreme Court has taken this case. It obviously has momentous implications for the future of social media. There's a general proposition that the court has announced that you have a right not to associate with speech, just like you have a right to associate with speech. The famous case on New Hampshire, they required you to have a license plate that said live free or die, and the court said you can't force that. But then go back, I'll speed up here. It's possible that the court would interject itself in many of the pending cases now that are percolating the state courts, trying to disqualify Trump from being on the ballot under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. I think the court will say we want to sit this one out and let it percolate below.
And we'll return after these commercial breaks. Joe, I was listening to Bruce and I was thinking about, there will be another government shutdown looming, another deficit battle. How does our political class in this back and forth with this deficit issue weaken our standing around the world?
Well, it weakens our standing because investors worldwide are realizing neither party seems to be serious about actually addressing our long-term structural deficits. And as that occurs, you'll actually see less demand for our government debt. Well, when that occurs, that means our government has to pay more to borrow those resources. And something that's not getting enough press right now, the interest payments on our national debt just this year alone almost total what we're spending in total on our military. We're spending around $10,000 per family just on the interest on the accumulated debt. And that is set to grow far worse into the future. And as our nation is consumed with all the legal troubles of Hunter Biden and possibly his father and the legal troubles of President Trump, we're heading into what is a pivotal presidential election. And yet we are hearing almost zero discussion from the leading candidates on how they will actually address these long-term structural deficits. And if we don't like what we saw the past 2 years with the inflation that was driven by all this spending, we need to remember it can get far worse. Look at what happened in Argentina the last few decades. It went from being one of the wealthiest countries in the world to one of the poorest in our hemisphere because they continued down a reckless fiscal path. We are headed down that path right now, and we have just a few short years to remedy it before the course correction will be far more painful.
I want to tell you, this will surprise you. There's one statement in 2023 that I haven't even talked about that really haunted me, that came from the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin. And he said, if you don't fund Ukraine, your sons, your nephews, and your fathers will be dragged to battle on the battlefield of Ukraine to fight this war. I mean, did you read that? I mean, what was he saying? I mean, it sent chills down my spine. What was he saying?
He's trying to frighten, inflate danger to try to get money for Ukraine rather than for the American people. Now, He doesn't understand. You know, Ukraine's borders, Russian borders have changed probably 100 times over the last centuries. We pointed out earlier, every border in the world is drawn by the sword. So it's and this idea that Biden has said, and that's the future of democracy turns on Ukraine, you know. The same thing was said, the future of Fiume.
But was he saying the interests of Ukraine outweigh the lives of our brothers?
Yeah, that we should go and fight for the Ukraine freedom because they won't do it. Which, of course, is absurd.
It is absurd.
Yeah, completely absurd.
Does his sentiments reflect this of the administration?
I think they do reflect the administration. Joe Biden says we got to get rid of Mr. Putin because he's a bad guy.
So they threaten Republicans in Congress that if you don't give us the money, we're going to draft your fathers, your sons, and your nephews to fight this war.
They're not going to draft. Don't worry. They'll just go to war on their own. And that's another problem here. Only Congress can declare war. We will end up being at war in Ukraine on the unilateral decision of Joe Biden and the Secretary of Defense, which is utterly crazy.
I heard. Listen, no one's talking about it.
Yeah.
And this happened last year. It sends chills down your spine to think that the Secretary of Defense could be so bold to make such a statement. We'll be back with some final thoughts. Don't go away. If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com. So, Joe, what gives you hope as we commence this new year? Give us hope, especially for Americans who are struggling every day with just simple essentials.
Well, what gives me hope is that the American public is waking up. They're starting to connect the dots between the reckless government spending and borrowing of the past few years and the fact that we've seen our real standard of living decline by the largest in 40 years. And if we look to what's happened in other parts of the world over the past year with elections, look at Argentina that just selected a free market economist as their president. Look to what happened in the Netherlands, where a conservative won. Look to Italy, where another person on the center right won the presidency of Italy. I think across the world, people are understanding that the deterioration in the lifestyles the past few years, it's not because of businesses, it's the result of government action, and they're demanding accountability. And that gives me hope that going forward of this year, we're going to see a real debate between the presidential candidates about the best way to get our country back on track.
Any thoughts on the nominees for both parties in this year's election?
Dreadful. So, yeah. I mean, look out there. I don't see George Washington. I don't see Thomas Jefferson, Madison, John Quincy Adams. I think we really do lack statesmen anymore. These are not people who are deep and thoughtful. Think about things like, are we saddling our posterity with $33 trillion in debt, and for what reason? And we're going to have our men and women and children risk that last full measure of devotion for Ukrainians, not for defecting and creating invincible self-defense at home, and understanding that the true greatness of the United States is the greatness of our individuals with innovation, with ambition, with industry, creating new jobs, marching to their own drummer. That liberty is what is our glory, not the armored knight. And that's what we're still looking for, unfortunately. And maybe it's a time to vote for none of the above. But get out and vote. Make it clear that you're still engaged. But if none of the candidates appeal to you, don't have to mark a ballot on that position.
You know, it reminds me that the first bullet fired during the American Revolution were by farmers.
Yeah.
And the best of America is always its ordinary people, not its political class that have grown greedy, egomaniacal, self-interest. They do their own bidding. Bob Menendez, we're still waiting on his fate. Nobody talks about him anymore and his wife. Gold in his home, being traced back to gold that was stolen, that the mainstream media don't put a light on, don't focus on it anymore. America has lost so much trust in the political class, and they don't know what institutions to trust anymore, except everyday Americans will always be the engine, the fuel that continues the greatness of this country, because they're not corrupt. They're innocent, they're hard work, they make sacrifice, they invest in this political class, and what they get in return, is little or nothing to show for it. I'm Armstrong Williams. Again, happy 2024. Thank you for watching this edition. Tune in for the next edition of this broadcast.